Ladies and gentlemen, we enter the very first panel discussion on that note. This is going to be on global capital markets paradigm, startup funding opportunities. That is the panel, that's the one which is, the reflections are going to happen on this topic. May I therefore invite Shri Sanjay Jain, partner, Bharat Innovation Fund. If you're in the audience, please join us on stage. Mr. Arjun Rao, General Partner, Special Incept. Venkat S. Raju, Venture Partner, Your Nest Ventures. And to moderate this discussion, I'm going to invite Alec Wright, Chief Product Officer, One Valley. Alec is a Chief Product Officer, a business services company founded in 2012 with a venture capital background. Alec Wright previously held the role of Chief Product Officer at Nest GV. He holds a law degree from Georgetown University Law Center. Please join me with a round of applause in welcoming this panel. It's over to the moderator.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'd like to take a moment and thank everyone for spending the next 45, 50 minutes with us and welcome you to day 2 of the G20 DIA Summit. As I was just introduced, I'm Alec Wright. I'm the Chief Product Officer of One Valley and one of the Managing Directors of One Valley Ventures, where we invest in pre-seed and seed startups across a variety of different industries. Through One Valley, we support hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs across the world. So this discussion is incredibly close to my heart as we're going to go into the depths and turns of today's funding landscape and what it means for entrepreneurs across India and across the world that are building the industries and technologies of tomorrow. Risk capital is truly the fuel of the startup economy, and there are hundreds of thousands of companies across the world that are dependent upon venture capital, angel investment, and people willing to put money behind their dreams and vision. So we could not have a gathering of many of the G20's top startups and stakeholders without having a conversation on funding and its impact on the startup ecosystem. So let's take a moment and meet our panelists. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Sanjay Jain, a partner at the Bharat Innovation Fund. Sanjay is a technology leader with a passion for digital public goods. He's a partner at the Bharat Innovation Fund and is also the chair of the technology committee at MOSIP and a volunteer at iSprit. He's been responsible for the development of many large-scale, high-impact systems, including Google MapMaker, UPI, and Aadhaar. Sanjay, thank you so much for being with us today. Next, I'd like to introduce Arjun Rao, a general partner at Speciale Invest. Arjun has spent over 15 years in the technology and internet startup ecosystem in India. He started his career at Yahoo and later joined Ibibo as a product manager. The entrepreneurial bug led him to start an edutech startup and also a travel tech startup, Travelliari, where he led tech and product teams as well as strategy and fundraising at all phases of the startup lifecycle. At Travelliari, he built the company to achieve revenues of over 40 million and raised $12 million across several different funding rounds. Arjun's experience spans product development, product management, digital marketing at various growth stage companies. Again, we're incredibly fortunate to have an operator and investor like Arjun joining us on today's panel. And then finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Venkat S. Raju, who's a venture partner at Your Nest Venture Capital. He has a serial entrepreneur, 3 exits, 2 in Silicon Valley and 1 in Bangalore, and also a seasoned corporate executive at Fortune 500 corporations across financial services, high tech, and telecom, based out of New York, San Francisco, London, and Bangalore. He's an active angel investor, advisor, and board member in startups, currently with a portfolio of over 70 companies, and is also an advisor to select funds, incubators, and accelerators. Will everyone please take a moment and welcome our panelists to the stage and thank them for their time today. I'd like to get started with a general question for our panelists. There has been almost endless discussion over the incredibly dynamic startup funding landscape over the last 3 to 4 years. We saw an unprecedented influx in capital flow into startups across the globe in 2020 and 2021, and then a major correction that saw global startup funding drop about 35% in 2022 and another 50% year over year in the first quarter of 2023. So I'd love to start with you, Sanjay. When you think about today's funding landscape, what is your perspective on today's opportunities in India and what startups should be thinking about as they seek their next round of funding?
So, as an investor, I believe in a lot of fundamentals, and I would like to see my companies build out a viable unit economics model, prove it with very limited amount of capital, and then and only then apply the fuel to grow. And so I think that's advice for all times, not just for today. The only issue is that when there's a big amount of glut of capital, bad money chases out good money. And you have to watch out, you have to raise capital in a competitive way, but that's not now. So I think stick to the fundamentals, build out a viable business, understand the customer, what they want, what they don't want, and there are enough people out there, even with the reduced capital requirements, who will come out and support you.
No, I think it's back to basics for founders, and a lot of the excess of 2020 and 2021, where you could raise capital at unbelievable valuations with minimal traction. I think we're coming back to reality and having to focus on building profitable businesses that have the opportunity to be capital efficient and really impact without raising necessarily hundreds of millions or billions of dollars before you get to that point.
Actually, there are certain sectors where that's not going to be the case, but for I think the vast majority of startups, that is the case. I mean, if you want to build out a drug or you want to build a LiDAR system like our previous guest, right? I mean, you're going to need a fairly large amount of capital to start with. And to do that, you need a lot of credibility. And so typically it will be people who have built that credibility who then are able to bring that large amounts of seed capital to bear. But I think for the vast majority of founders, I would say that's not the case.
And it certainly makes sense, and we'll have a deeper conversation on deep tech startups in general and the unique dynamics that they're facing here in a moment. But I think it's really incumbent upon entrepreneurs to take advantage of the efficiencies that software has created, where now you can build big businesses quickly and efficiently, and get to those profitable unit economics early. So Venkat, are you seeing similar dynamics? And what advice would you have for founders that are fundraising in the new world?
Very much so. So I am old enough to know I was there during the dot-com bubble in the Bay Area. And then I was in New York during the 2008 Lehman crisis. And then even most recently during the COVID situation, the advice was on unit economics and watch your capital. But this cycle keeps, we never seem to learn from the past, and it keeps repeating. So hopefully at least this time, at least the young entrepreneurs out there, fundamentals matter, I would say. Unit economics matter. Think about, you are not going to be subsidizing every single transaction with investor money. If that is your business model, you're going nowhere. So go back to basics, go back to fundamentals, and if you have that, I think even in the toughest of climates, you will be able to raise money.
Thank you, Venkat. And Arjun, what are you seeing at Speciale Invest?
Yeah, I think I'll resonate with what my colleagues have said. We are an early stage fund focused on deep technology ideas. We're typically the first check in, right, when somebody has a concept and an idea and they want to build it out and take it to market, right? And in this environment, for us, it goes back to the basics, which is to say, innovation is always best done under constraints. Right? And we have come back to that situation where constraints are being forced upon everybody, unlike maybe 2020, 2021, right? And that's what's very important for all ecosystem stakeholders alike, investors as well as entrepreneurs, is to sort of try and forget 2020 and 2021. It's not easy, but we have to forget those 2 years happened and understand that it'll probably never come back, right? And be focused on really innovating and using all the cutting edge tools and tech that is available to everyone to build really great businesses, both in hardware and software. And that's what we're focusing on. That's the kind of entrepreneurs we're looking for. That's the kind of ideas we're looking for.
No, I think the notion of big ideas getting funded on day one, versus having to do the work and actually build long-lasting businesses is just the new reality. I'm curious, given that you're often the first check into a lot of companies, what are you looking for? Or what can an entrepreneur do to excite you in that first interaction when they may not have the traction or the track record of a couple years of growth?
Yeah, I think that's. We don't have the numbers, we don't have data at that point in time, so it's fairly subjective. But 2 or 3 key aspects that we care about and that we spend a lot of time trying to evaluate at that stage is, why is this founder building this company, right? What is the problem statement that this founder has identified, right? And obviously the solution for that being substantially differentiated than what is available in the market. So the why of solving this problem, why the timing is right, and why this particular founder is very, very critical to us. And typically in deep tech startups, right, you need deep technical insight to solve a problem. And for that, we feel that the founder should have spent time either in academia or in corporate or in some close setting to have identified this problem and figured out a solution. So for us, the history of where the founder comes from and why they're trying to solve this problem is super critical. And we try to really peel the layers of the onion and spend a lot of time talking to these founders to understand how they've arrived at that. The second aspect is, do we see a sense of tenacity in the founders, right? To go through the long haul, to build a business, to build a company over 10, 15, and even longer periods of time. And again, you got to see, what experiences they've had in life, what their personal motivations are, right, to see, because you're going to face problems. You're going to face ups and downs. You're going to face a downturn or two, right, in building a large company and in that journey, right? So that's the number 2 to say, is there tenacity to go through really tough phases, capital not available, really high competition, right, hiring talent, so on and so forth. The third is, how do they sell the vision? Right? Because that is, again, for a founder, is what a key aspects of what a founder has to do. You've got to sell the vision all the time, because it takes time to build the product, then take it out to market, then have revenues and a brand, right? But in the interim, you're still selling a vision. You first sell it to probably your co-founders. Second, you sell it to investors. And then you want to hire amazing talent to execute on the vision that you have. So you've got to sell that to early talent, because you cannot pay market salaries. So consistently, you're selling a vision. So you've got to see if the founder has that capacity and that capability to sell the vision. So we sort of look at these 3 aspects. They're not comprehensive, but they're a good starting point for us.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And as we're working with the 120 companies that are pitching here yesterday and throughout today, we're always saying you're always pitching. And whether it's to those stakeholders or to your family, because you're spending all your time at the
Absolutely.
office and selling the vision, you need to get really comfortable with that. But I'd love to shift the conversation a little bit to some of the other changes in the startup landscape. It hasn't just been volatility of capital, but I'm really curious as to this group's thought on the impact of digital innovation in digital platforms enabling startups to fundraise more effectively, which again was one of the outcomes of 2020 and 2021 when we couldn't be in person as much. I'm curious, Venkat, maybe we'll start with you. Are you seeing an impact from these type of digital platforms, or is it more narrative than reality?
In bits and pieces, have they come mainstream? Not quite, but in different regions, in different pockets, I've seen a virtual Shark Tank mode, if you will. I've seen angel platforms and networks offering the capability to pitch everything done completely digital without any offline, in-person meetings, if you will. And then like a combination of various technologies, whether it is a social media like Clubhouse, where they bring together investors and founders together for pitch sessions and so on. So a variety of things. And I'm not even going into the Web3 DeFi land, but clearly an ability for not just like the typical investors, but retail investors, the ability to participate in fundraising activities. So these are all emerging. They haven't come mainstream. And again, I'm not going into the crypto side of things and ICOs, etc. But you really look at the landscape, a wide variety of technologies, tools, are all platforms coming together to create a real automated fundraising ecosystem, if you will. How long will it take? Time will tell. But I'm excited. I'm excited for the young entrepreneurs because they do have multiple choices now. Sitting here in Bangalore, they should be able to connect with a variety of investors, in a variety of locations. As long as they are able to make the case, they should be able to raise money.
No, I think it's a great point that it's the structured, purpose-driven platforms like angel platforms and Shark Tank-like platforms, but it's also then things like Twitter, or now X, if that's what it's called, where people are able to build in public, raise awareness around what they're doing. It's been very interesting to see people attracting angel investment via Twitter and some of those other places.
Even like the crowdfunding guys like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, they started with pre-ordered stuff, but have moved on to funding projects and films, you name it. So the variety of options available. And I haven't touched on the debt side of things because most startups, clearly, until they reach a later stage, they get access to venture debt. But increasingly now, debt is an option for startup founders as well. Whether it is on revenue-based, invoice discounting, and a variety of other platforms offering them. So equity and dilution is not necessarily the only route for them.
It's no longer a time when, as a founder, you just line up as many VC meetings as you can, and that's your fundraising process. Right. Sanjay, I'd really like your perspective on this, and in particularly what you're seeing here and your thoughts, but also the role that this is playing in potentially creating new funding opportunities for entrepreneurs that aren't in major tech hubs and don't have immediate access to some of those traditional venture ecosystems, because I know that's a big focus of the Bharat Innovation Fund.
Actually, from the we are part of a family of vehicles, and so some of them do have that focus. But broadly, what we do is we go out with very focused ways to say we are going to raise funding, for example, for space tech. So we run a space tech accelerator, we bring in the right startups, and then we also try and bring in investors who can then connect with them. So we actually go with very focused activities on that side of it. That's really more part of our sister organization called CIIE, and not really a part of the Bharat Fund. But I do see the growth of all of these platforms as really a democratization of funding. And we see a lot of retail investors, people who are founders, HNIs, etc., who want to be a part of this ecosystem. And I think while Shark Tank raises global awareness, and you can hear conversations in a plane where people say, I want to offer X for 5% or whatever, right? I mean, that kind of language has seeped into our common culture. And that's quite exciting because that does mean that the people are willing to support innovation through writing checks. I also think that a lot of them will, we know this is very risky capital. And, but I think it's good that there is a phase where it will grow and then it'll become more smart and intelligent and consolidate. But I do see that for a startup entrepreneur who is not in a major town, their ability to raise funds is actually going up. And that's a great thing.
The focus on inclusivity is one of our main goals here today and with the entire G20 DIA Summit. And we certainly are in the early days of what this new digital funding landscape looked like. But I think democratization is really the right word for it. And I'm curious, Arjun, what's your perspective on the role of digital platforms?
No, I think it's been well covered by both Sanjay and Venkat. So, not too much additional to add. The only one thing I'll probably say is, that fine balance of, crowdsourced capital with strong, diligenced institutional capital. I think that balance can work magic for founders, right? On the crowdsourced side or the angel side, democratized side, the other aspect that Sanjay mentioned is you're getting operators, you're getting founders who are putting in. And that is, again, a big win for founders when they're raising money. It's sort of, it's not the check size, but the check size is a signal that you can get access to somebody's time, right? Somebody who's been there, done that. And how a founder can use that is going to be very valuable, right? Don't just look at it as whether it is $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever, small pools of capital, but look at it as, hey, I can tap into this person's background and this person's network and understanding of the market while I build the business. And that's why you want to get a bunch of angels on board. I think both these concepts make a lot of sense, and I think we're just moving in that direction.
Actually, I do want to add to Arjun's point here, because actually we are all three very similar, so you'll see a lot of agreement between us. But the point I wanted to add on was that in the Indian startup ecosystem, if you will, about 8-10 years ago, when we were looking at this ecosystem, we said there's not been enough generation of entrepreneurs, and not generations from the sense of birth, but people building companies, then supporting the next player, or even early employees leaving and starting their own. So I think what we are now seeing is that maturity. We now see entrepreneurs who supported other entrepreneurs who supported other entrepreneurs. We're like about 3 or 4 generations deep right now. And I think that in itself is such a great sign for the ecosystem that, I think we will see more and more benefits out of that.
No,
I wish 15 years ago when I started my company, I had these options, right? So it's a great place to be.
No, it's so true. We always talk about, we always get asked, what's the magic of Silicon Valley? And what we always say is it's the pay it forward mindset and culture, and that flywheel of entrepreneurs coming and supporting that next generation of entrepreneurs that you really start to see ecosystems take off. And it's such a great point that India's at that incredible moment right now where entrepreneurs are just, the ecosystem has reached such a level of maturity. Now, it's been mentioned a couple times since we've been up here, but we have several of India's most successful deep tech investors on the stage. And so I'd love to shift focus of the conversation to this particular category of startups that are taking core intellectual property and hard science to solve some of the world's most challenging problems. Of course, that's why we're here today, and that's why we're focused on agri-tech, health tech, fintech, circular economy, secure digital infrastructure, and ed tech. These are a lot of the innovations that are driving meaningful change in these places are those kind of deep tech examples. So I'd love to hear, Sanjay, what are you seeing as investor appetite for deep tech in India, and what is unique about the funding and commercialization needs of deep tech startups?
So if you look at deep tech startups, there is typically a fairly, depending on the space that you're operating in, that kind of technology, there is the time to actually build out the underlying IP or moat, if you will. And when we talk about Bharat Innovation Fund, our thesis is that IP serves as a moat. It's something which prevents other people from copying what you're doing. And that takes time to build, and also time to demonstrate that it actually makes a difference in the end product. And so, but there is a fair amount of funding at the earlier stages. We typically come in after some of that has been demonstrated, but I think my colleagues here on the dais come in a little earlier than we do. But there is funding available at all 3 stages, starting from the early stage and then the pre-Series A, Series A category onwards. But the needs are beyond the money. It is what kind of expertise we can bring to diligence the deal, what kind of connectivity we can provide the entrepreneurs in their go-to-market strategy, because typically when you're building something, you end up needing a way to take it to market, to do pilots, to build partnerships, and the kind of support that it takes. And I think a lot of the institutional capital out there really focuses on making that happen. And that's eventually how you would succeed in that real world where you not take this IP and try to bring it to market.
Yeah, and it's so true that really purely technical founders really need that support ecosystem on go-to-market, and sometimes they have a co-founder, but sometimes it's their investors in the ecosystem that help them bridge from the science and technology into the commercial market. Arjun, you mentioned that Speciale Invest is focused on funding these innovators at the earliest stages. What has been your experience with the growth of deep tech in India, and what do you think is coming next?
We started the firm about 6.5 years ago with, a view that we were on the cusp of a deep tech revolution in India, right? And if you just look back the last 30 years or so, we started with IT services. We went on to have, offshore dev centers of product companies, global Silicon Valley companies set up shop here. I started my career at Yahoo, right here in Bangalore, right? And after that, we built our own product companies, but those are, which is Flipkarts of the world, the Paytms of the world, Swiggies of the world, so on and so forth, but they were mainly tech-enabled. They were not deep tech, right? They were not IP-driven, as Sanjay was mentioning, right? So it just logically makes sense that now the talent pool has grown substantially. We have know-how, and we are stepping up to the next level of building cutting-edge stuff. The timing has to be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we have to build these. That's when we started. From an evolution perspective, it's been amazing to see how many founders we see now in the ecosystem solving really hard problems, hardware and software. I think India is a little stronger known for software, right? But I think that is fast changing, that we're building amazing hardware companies. And typically these days, hardware is never hardware alone. It is always hardware plus software. And that integration is happening very strongly. Second, we're also known to be very frugal innovators in general, because we did not have disproportionate capital. Both these things, I think, augur very well for the transition into the deep tech ecosystem, right? And over the last 5, 6 years, we have seen both number of entrepreneurs and the quality of entrepreneurs grow. And second, from an investor perspective, like Sanjay was mentioning, the number of funds focusing on these areas and spending time and dollars is also growing. So that's, I think, we are on the cusp. We're starting to see the really larger funds who were maybe in the first few years biding their time, but they're now starting to bite, right? And all of this is very exciting.
No, I think there's a very good chance that Austin Russell's next competitor for the great, the next great LiDAR innovation may be coming out of India, and that's an exciting thing to see.
We're definitely looking for them.
Now, Venkat, both of them have mentioned the importance of intellectual property and the potential moat it could create for companies. I'm curious, as your nest is looking at entrepreneurs, what is the work you do to diligence IP, and then how do you see IP affecting the long-term success of deep tech ventures?
So we like to call ourselves looking into companies that are IP-led. So it is like better be really deep in terms of technology. And what we look for is not necessarily how many number of patents that they have. It is but like the depth. Is the IP deep enough? And that means, is that truly original? It is not something that's copied from somewhere and they're trying to create something like with a slightly better mousetrap. But is that really deep technology, fully thought through with original thinking, that is going to create real innovative products and solutions that are highly differentiated? That is primarily what we look for. Then obviously we spend quite some time with the founders to understand the overall IP strategy. Because for me, IP is a means to an end. Means to an end to create competitive differentiation. Means to an end to create a moat and a defensibility for the long term. So that means IP also needs to be thought through in terms of timing. Like, okay, are you going to file for patents and reveal a lot of information even before you have established yourself? What is the right time? And where do you want to file your patents, for example? Do you want to say, I had 20 patents sitting in India and your market is global, but I can't afford to spend so much money elsewhere in the US, Europe, etc. So these are the kind of things that we sit down with the founders, better understand, post the investment in terms of what is the IP strategy going to be, how is it going to be done, and is it really truly differentiated? Personally speaking, for me, I look for core, the quality of the patents, if you will, and not necessarily the quantity. And so that's how we look at it.
No, and I think it's a great point as to the value that investors with this experience can bring, which is, you're a founder and you're focused in a deep technical area. You're not looking at the Madrid Protocol and understanding what global intellectual property protection looks like, and bringing the right investors that have that experience can actually create your IP strategy over the long term. So I'd like to shift focus to another central theme of this conference. If you look around, you'll see the phrase, one Earth, one family, one future. And I'm really curious about the role of innovation driving improvements in environmental, social, and governance outcomes, often referred to ESG. I'm curious, is there anyone here where ESG plays a role in how they're thinking about where they deploy capital and the entrepreneurs that they want to support?
Yeah, I could just give a headline, right? Whether the term term being ESG or not, specifically is probably debatable. But for us, it's the broader problem of making the climate a better place, right? And we are all dealing with this every day in terms of climate change and issues because of that, and global warming and et cetera, right? As a deep tech fund, our focus was always tech first, innovation first, et cetera, when we were looking at companies. And actually, over the last year or so, when we started looking at our portfolio, we saw most of the hardware innovation ended up having very strong climate tech flavors by default, right? I think the hardest problems in climate tech will need to be solved with innovation, hardware mainly, right? And of course, some combination of data, software, and AI. And therefore, right, it just seems like for us, deep tech, climate tech is sort of a very strong overlap anyway, correct? So while we don't call ourselves a climate tech fund, but if you look at our portfolio, you'll find that about 30–40% of our portfolio is actually solving climate problems. We have satellite companies that are doing Earth observation to help identify, various, data points like, wildfires and warming, right? We have water companies that are building water from air. We have companies that are generating green hydrogen. There's just many, many examples of this, right? I think the lines will get blurred, and finally, as long as you're solving large industry and commercial problems, which are also making the world a better place to live, I think capital will continue to flow. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know if I answered the ESG angle of it.
No, it's great. And it's the question of, it's not ESG for the sake of ESG. It's aligning economic returns and building
Absolutely.
big businesses with the environmental outcomes and solving the problems that we're really facing as a world.
So, Alec, we have a slightly different, when we invest, part of our thesis is inclusion. And when we say inclusion, we are actually talking more about formalization, financial inclusion, bringing people into the job market. And so, taking technology to where more people can access it and leverage it. So it's a very different angle. I don't think that gets measured in the ESG metrics that you hear about in the public markets. But that's really a lot of what we do, is try and see how we reduce costs, and hence we can serve a larger market more viably. And we see this in payments, we see this in banking services. So a lot of fintech is, the headline fintech is still serving the top end of the market, but the real impact of fintech from an inclusion perspective is really where you go to a village and you can make a digital payment, you can make sure that they get a loan in a very short period of time that is affordable to their and fit for the purpose. And so I think there is a lot of that, and that's really a big part of our portfolio, is supporting that kind of innovation. There's a platform for gig workers, making sure people get more jobs. So I think we are in that phase of our journey where we are taking technology, taking it beyond the top 100, 200 million people in the country down to the next 500 million. And the only reason I say that is the rest is children. And so for us to take technology, to bring them all into the formal parts of society, to digitize their lives, to help them put these digital footprints, which then can be used for their benefit, is something which we focus on. A lot of our portfolio is about that, and we very much look at that angle when we invest.
No, it makes so much sense. It's when technology and innovation gets, pushed from the 1% out into the world that you really start changing people's lives, impacting culture, and inclusion is certainly one of the focus and themes of the day. And unless we have a tech ecosystem that is really helping everyone, it's never going to fulfill its true potential. So I'm curious, it's a perfect segue into this question of inclusion. What are you seeing, and Venkat, as you're looking at supporting founders, how are you ensuring that not only is the technology that's being built impacting a broader group of society, but that the entrepreneurs that are, that you're seeing and that are getting funded are coming from diverse backgrounds, diverse geographies, and that, capital is flowing into the best ideas regardless of zip code or pedigree?
So clearly merit matters, quality matters, so we are never going to compromise on who we choose based on other factors, but certainly we do apply a ESG lens, if you will, because as partners, we do believe in inclusion, ESG, and such principles, not to mention our LP, our anchor LP, if you will, has, has strict guidelines on ESG. So every single investment, before we make a decision, we look at it from an ESG lens, an inclusion lens, diversity, and clearly we are part of this overall ecosystem. And yes, you talked about zip codes, and there are some, I mean, when we talk about the startup ecosystem in India, it's always Bangalore and NCR and Mumbai, etc. But we do really look and make an effort to unearth promising entrepreneurs. So this is done proactively through a pull, if you will. So some of us actually spread out across the country in search of high quality startups. For example, we ran a program called SOAR. The intent being we went across hinterlands to identify, so we threw a sort of challenge, over a long weekend, spent time in these pockets to identify. And in that process, we did really find enough good startups to invest, and some of the best ones performing now in our portfolio happen to be such startups, actually.
And doing the work to see those different companies is it's important for those entrepreneurs, and it's important for fund returns, because if you're only, fishing in the same pool of entrepreneurs as every other fund, as Arjun said, sometimes bad capital runs out good capital. But no, it's a very helpful insight. Now, I'd love to talk about the role of ecosystems, and this is both in making startups generally successful, but also making the inclusion that you were just discussing possible. Venkat, what have you been seeing about, especially given you've been a mentor in so many different accelerator programs, you've worked in so many different ecosystems. What do you think are the most important elements of a robust, powerful startup ecosystem, and what stakeholders need to be, around the table to make that work?
This is a great forum right now. We have like 20 different countries, and the minister from Turkey talked about what he's trying to do. And we hear that across the board, certainly in India, all the way from the central government to each one of the state governments. And they are all trying to compete, and very constructively, I would say, in terms of creating ecosystems. I mean, the bar has been set. Everyone talks about Silicon Valley and how they were able to bring together, entrepreneurs, academia, governments, funding entities, etc. I would like to call out the Cambridge, Massachusetts ecosystem, actually, in terms of following something, because you see an effective collaboration where the central government, whether it is their grants, agencies such as NIH, FDA, and so on, providing the grants to MITs and the Harvards of the world for, research activities, who in turn have students who turn into entrepreneurs. You have the VCs, life sciences focused VCs coming together, and the participation of industry, biotech companies, pharma companies. If you look around like a 2-mile radius out there, they have figured out, I won't call it a playbook, but what their respective roles are going to be. And what I see is like very good, well-meaning policies and proposals and grants and everything, but we still haven't created such a playbook. It's hard. Other regions have tried to replicate and copy that, and not very successfully. It's very hard to pull that off. So we need to create a framework and a playbook to see how all these well-meaning efforts come together, and where we all can collaborate together for the benefit of the overall ecosystem. Once you do it at a regional level, we can take it to a national level. Once you take it to that, then we do it at a G20 level, and perhaps way beyond G20. So that's a dream.
I think we've got a vision. I mean, that sounds like an incredible way to think about the future of startup ecosystems in India and beyond. Sanjay, you were saying earlier that you set up these thematically focused incubation programs and acceleration programs, and how you bring all the right people around the table, for those particular themes. What is the impact that you've seen of kind of having that ecosystem that's purpose-built for those companies?
So for the last 4 years, we ran something called the Bharat Inclusion Initiative around the same inclusion theme. We got a lot of funding from philanthropic capital because that's what it is meant for, is to drive inclusion. And we were able to bring in experts from around the country who could then mentor these startups. And we did village immersion programs where we took the startups to the field. We had the product being tried out by different people, gathered feedback, and so on. And I think we found that the kind of capital that was put in got a leverage of over 40x from actual, non-philanthropic capital, so to speak, right? And so they're able to raise more and then build. And while it's still early days, we'll see the outcomes. But overall, every metric we are tracking, number of, so we had about $15 million going to this, 1.5. And that had, we reached out to over 20 million people through these startups. They raised, like I said, a large amount of capital to follow on. They raised the number of women who we were able to, whose lives we were able to impact was quite large, and so on. I think every metric that the philanthropists are looking for, we were able to meet and exceed. And I think those startups are now hopefully going to go out and make scale up and make even more of a difference.
We need to learn more about that playbook and what the elements of it that really worked were, because there's such a need for that both across India as well as the globe, in creating those ecosystems that, again, I think maybe the word of the panel is democratize access to innovation and opportunity. So with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I would love to chat with this group for another 20, 30 minutes, but I really want to take another minute to thank this incredible panel of investors and operators. This 45 minutes was packed with a lot of insight for entrepreneurs across India as well as the globe, and it was a real pleasure getting to spend this time up here today. Please, let's get a warm round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you, Alec.
Thank you, and I request you to stay back for a moment because you have a very important task to do, which is help us release a white paper. And please, if the white paper copies could be handed over to our panelists. Digital Revolution, Unlocking Social Welfare Through Health Tech Innovations. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the white paper that's being launched before your eyes. And I would like to thank all our panelists for a wonderful session. And after the release of this white paper, meanwhile, some of you who want to know about this can find the QR code in your own conference kits. You can look for this, particularly the Unlocking Social Welfare Through Health Tech Innovations. If you are in this space, it's of definite interest to you. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for doing the deed. May I request the moderator to hand over tokens of gratitude, mementos to all our speakers. First to Mr. Sanjay Jain, Partner, Bharat Innovation Fund. To Mr. Arjun Rao, General Partner, Speciale Incept. To Mr. Venkat S. Raju, Venture Partner, Your Nest Ventures. And may I request Mr. Suryakant to please step up on stage, Program Director, MeitY Startup Hub, to offer a memento to our very able moderator, Mr. Alec Wright, Chief Product Officer, One Valley. And for coming to this stage of the G20 DIA Summit and for sharing so much of your wisdom and of your work experiences, we would like to thank you with a round of applause, please, from the audience. Thank you once again. I hope you have a very productive time at the summit. Meanwhile, it's time for me, Vasanthi, to invite the next panel onto the stage. This is on the topic of digital innovation, scaling for success. May I invite Shri Rajiv Gupta, President, PB Fintech Policy Bazaar.